it take to go from talking to an actual deal? We're joining me now, two congressmen from opposite sides of the aisle. Maybe they can find some points of agreement. They're Democrat Jim Himes of the Financial Services Committee and Republican Tom Cole, the Deputy Majority Whip. Welcome to you both. You're smiling. Has the good news filtered through now to you all? Are you all feeling happy? Is there going to be a deal? Let's start with you, Jim Himes. What are you sensing?
Well, I'm encouraged. I'm cautiously encouraged. On the one hand, one thing that encourages me is that after the meeting today, nobody ran for the microphones. Neither the president nor the Republican leadership ran for the microphones, and that's always a good sign that people are getting serious and really working towards a solution. And then I'm also gratified to see that that people are really focused on making sure we don't default on the full faith and credit. The government shutdown is uncomfortable. It's hurting a lot of people, but the fire we were playing with on default was really a horrifying thing.
Tom Cole, I mean, it seems that everyone's agreed there's going to be like a 6-week extension on the debt ceiling. Everyone seems to that's the most sensible course of action. Everyone agrees the government should be reopened. The only question, I guess, now for the Republicans, given the pretty awful polls that have come out tonight with more and more Americans blaming Republicans, is what kind of concessions, if any, they get as part of this process. How do you see the deal, which is probably pretty close to being done now, actually being completed?
Well, I agree very much, actually, with what Jim had to say. I think we've made some real progress. Both sides clearly recognize you don't jeopardize the good faith and credit of the United States. Both sides are talking. Both sides have agreed to continue the discussion. I'm not too worried about the particulars of what they'll decide on. It does seem to me that opening the government sooner rather than later is a good thing to do. Look, we're going to pay these folks anyway, which was the right thing to do. Over half the government is up and operational with the Defense Department and essential workers. You know, why would you keep paying people and not giving them the opportunity to work? So we ought to do that. But I think probably the key thing from a Republican standpoint is that there is a negotiation. And honestly, there's a time limit, not that it couldn't be renewed or extended. I think if there's a serious negotiation, there would be. But each side's given a little bit here now, and that sets the framework up for productive talks.
Jim Himes, I've got a great interview with Donald Trump coming up later, in which he really lays into Washington generally for the lack of ability, as he sees it, to negotiate and to get business done. But do you guys accept that this doesn't look very good, the way this is all played out?
Well, first of all, I never sort of look to Donald Trump for what is true and good in this world. But also, look, Donald Trump, in his business, when he doesn't like how something is going, he can just do as he does and say, "You're fired." None of us can say that to each other. We are all elected by very different people in different parts of this country, and you know, Donald Trump doesn't necessarily have to work with people. We have to find ways to work with each other. We can't fire each other, and that creates a very different dynamic here. And again, today it looks like maybe we're looking up on that count.
Well, you can be fired by the American public, of course.
Oh, every 2 years they get their chance.
Tom Cole, do you think that Donald Trump is a force for evil in this world, as Jim Himes seemed to be implying there?
No, look, never having met him, I'm not about to make a judgment about him. But look, I'd suggest what we're about here is part of a larger pattern of events. We had a lot of trouble. We came to a budget deal in April of 2011. Had a lot of fights and came to a budget deal in August, a debt ceiling deal in August of that same year. Had the fiscal cliff earlier in January of this year, had a continuing resolution deal in March. All four of those together have narrowed the deficit. That's why it's about half of what it was 3 years ago. All four of them were bipartisan. It looks to me like we're on the edge of doing the same thing again, but perhaps in a bigger way and more productively.
I want to play a quick clip from an interview with Ted Cruz that came out of tonight's Crossfire. Let's watch what he had to say.
They followed you into a ditch, and now there's obviously no chance that Obamacare is going to be defunded, and we're on the brink of a horrific default. Do you think that in the reflection of your own heart, you might say, you know what, I'm a new kid here, I think I owe you guys an apology?
You know, Van, I know you desperately want to change the topic from Obamacare, and it is striking. Hold on, let me answer your question.
From the default to the destruction of the world economy?
Van, let me answer your question. Listen, Democrats in this town do not want to discuss Obamacare. Why? Because it isn't working.
I mean, what is interesting, isn't it, Jim Himes, is that actually Obamacare has suddenly disappeared off the talking points here because everyone recognized it was becoming the great obstruction to getting any deal done. Suddenly you've got Paul Ryan writing an op-ed piece where he doesn't even mention it.
Yeah, look, you know, Democrats do want to talk about the Affordable Care Act because the CNN Wall Street Journal poll that was released today showed that in the last week, the Affordable Care Act has actually risen 7 points in popularity over this last week. Now, by the way, we should all be willing to look at Obamacare and say what's good and what's bad, and let's have those negotiations. Absolutely, let's have those negotiations. Let's make a law that some people disapprove of better. Let's do that. It's hard, though, to look at the strategy that was led by Ted Cruz in the Senate and say that that ended up well from the standpoint of public perception for the opponents of Obamacare.
Well, Donald Trump, who I know you like very much, he gives a rousing defense of the Tea Party later. That comes later in the show. For now, Jim Hines and Tom Cole, thank you both very much indeed.